Well, it's great to be back in Canyon City again. It's been quite a while since I've had a chance to be at the Arkansas River Forum. It's great to see 16 years now that you've been at this, and Sid, I think you've done an excellent job on putting together the program, and I thank you and for the invitation to be here today. The Colorado Water Congress has been around for some 52 years now. We were created actually due to some conflict that, at least in part, came out of the Arkansas Basin related to the Frying Pan Arkansas project. The last time the Democrats had control of both houses of the Colorado legislature, and we had a Democratic governor, was back in, and a Republican attorney general, was back in 1958. And during that time, actually about a year or two before, the Governor Steve McNichols had been making a trip back to Washington, D.C. To promote the Frying Pan Arkansas project and funding for that. And he was testifying in front of a U.S. House committee, and he went through his testimony, and unbeknownst to him, another group came up and spoke against the project. And if those of you who work in D.C. know that you really need to present a united front. Well, he was really upset when he got back and said, well, can't people in Colorado just agree on water issues and we can find some, just speak with one common voice? And so that was the origin of the Water Congress. He was advised by most people that, no, you can't really do that. But he proceeded ahead, and the organization was originally housed in the Colorado Attorney General's office and Duke Dunbar's office. We were originally created and managed by a 19-member board that was geographically, we took the state essentially on the water districts and divided the state up in 19 districts, and were created and managed that way. We now have a 26-member board. We put on two conferences. Our largest one is our annual conference, which we just did back in January. Our next one is coming up in Vail, is our summer conference, and we'll be doing that the last week of August. Our largest committee, most active committee that we have is our State Affairs Committee. Many of you, some of you are in this room are on that committee. And that has about 180 members on it and representing some 90 organizations. We meet weekly during the legislative session to review legislation of interest to our members and typically take positions on average of about 20 to 21 bills per year. So we typically have about 50 or 60 people in the room, and we have this audio conferencing system with a dozen mics in the ceiling, and typically have about 30 people on the phone. So we have 70 or 80 people discussing legislation each week during the session. We typically are blessed to have the chairs of the House and Senate Ag committees, and it's a fairly unique thing that to have the presence of the legislature there at our meetings as well. So we have 70 or 80 people meeting weekly, discussing legislation and tracking that legislation. You can see the bills on our website that we're tracking. They're under State Affairs, and there's a link to bills of interest, and there are links to the bills and what the Water Congress's position are and how we're doing. Over the last 30 years, we've had an excellent track record. It's a pretty rare day when a water-related bill that our organization opposes passes, and about 85% of what we support gets signed into law. And so we've been very, very proud of that track record, and a lot of that is due to the partnerships that we have and working with a whole cadre of lobbyists, and we also have our own in addition to myself. So very, very active on water legislation. When I think about the Arkansas River, there are a lot of attributes that you're all very well familiar with. The issues, I think Sieta, again, has done an excellent job of framing those issues. We're very aware of the beauty of the river. But when I think of the Arkansas River, I think of the water conservancy districts, the associations, the interests that are really involved here on helping shape water issues. Thinking back to Frank Malinsky's book on water, The Answer to a Desert's Prayer, he talks some about all the things that were going on, but it's really a book about the people that really shaped this valley, or helped shape the issues. But in a lot of ways, it's actually the reverse is true, and that the river does really shape people's lives. And when I think about the Arkansas River, I think about the tremendous work that's gone on for decades and decades on working collaboratively to solve issues. Sieta said I could talk about not only, you've pretty well got everything covered, I think, on this program on what's going on in the Arkansas Basin. She said, well, if there's other issues that go outside this basin that you might want to talk about, you could do that. So I took liberty with that. And there's been a program that's been going for some 25 years now that doesn't happen here in the Arkansas Basin. It's really focused in the Colorado River Basin. And it has to do with 4 endangered fish species in the Colorado River. Those species would threaten to any trans-mountain diversion projects as well as water usage within the basin. So it's something that a lot of times we get involved in our day-to-day issues, and we maybe not think about some other things going on in the other basins that are essential to what happens here in your basin. As I said, the Water Congress has had a project going for 25 years now, and we have Tom Pitts working primarily for us. But his work is sponsored by a number of entities in this basin, as well as part of a much larger network of folks that extend well beyond this basin. That network includes a variety of federal agencies, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service. So you have a variety of federal agencies working on that. You have the states of Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming, and environmental organizations, including the Nature Conservancy and Western Resource Advocates. You also have 3 state associations in those states. The Water Congress, like Colorado, like most of the western states, we have parallel organizations in Utah and Wyoming. They've also been a participant, as well as various energy needs, Western Area Power Administration, Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association, and Colorado River Energy Distributors Association. All have been working for a very long time in what has been really a successful program. California would dearly love to have this kind of cooperation on the Bay Delta, I can tell you. And this program is held up by federal agencies wherever we go as a real national model for getting ahead of and dealing with endangered species issues. In Colorado alone, under the Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, there have been 1,100 consultations covering 2.1 million acre-feet of depletions, and there has not been a single lawsuit filed. That is phenomenal. The current work that goes on, this is a program that we worked on for about 5 years. The recovery program was actually begun being implemented in 1989, and most of the capital facilities have already been constructed. The hatcheries, the bypass, the fish ladders, and so forth. And it's just most of that has been taken care of. The program is now in a management mode, and with the goal of delisting these 4 endangered species by the year 2023. So it's been actively going on for a while, but it's got a long ways to go still. Currently, there are a variety of activities going on, one of which that I wanted to mention to you is the non-native fish removal. So they're stocking the fish. They're working to make sure they can move up and down the river. There's a lot that goes on in flow management through coordinated reservoir operations, releases from Root Eye Reservoir. But one of the most active activities that they have right now are just the non-native fish removal, and that's essentially going down the rivers electrofishing. It's not where you're sitting there with a beer in one hand and a rod in another. It's electrofishing and going down the river and hand sorting fish on some 444 miles of streams, which is pretty amazing. The funding for this program has come from a variety of sources. Over a third of it is coming from power revenues, but to date, the capital expenditure on this program alone has been $206 million. And we're currently spending between $10 and $15 million per year on the program for operation and maintenance and activities that were described there. And it's just so we have a long ways to go yet on continuing to fund this program. So you actually have partnerships also going with the electric area, power generation, that you pull that wedge out of there of the $76 million of funds, that large one, that comes from power revenues, and I'm not sure this program goes. So you have a partnership out there with Tri-State and WAPA that's really important to continued operations of activities here in the basin. The other wedge that I wanted to talk to you about sits in the lower left of that chart, and it's the $17 million that Colorado contributes to the program. Now, far and away, we contribute more money to that program than any other state, but we also are receiving more benefits, more consultations under the program. That $17 million comes from essentially severance tax funding. The state collects severance taxes from throughout the state, primarily from oil and gas development. That revenue varies wildly from down in the tens of millions to well over 200 million. And a quarter of that revenue goes to the perpetual base account, which is an account that's used by the Colorado Water Conservation Board for a variety of loans. The Arkansas Valley Conduit, as an example, is funded out of that account, or will be funded out of that account. That loan will come from there. Another quarter of it goes to another account called the operational account, and that money is used to fund the Species Conservation Trust Fund. It's also used to fund the Basin Roundtable process, the Water Supply Reserve Account, which is the money that the Basin Roundtables are approving. And so that account is extremely important. Now, what's happened, all of you are keenly aware of the budget crisis that this state is facing. And for the last 2 years, there's been a real push to try to find funds. And just like you're in my budgets ourselves, in balancing that budget, you can either increase your revenue, decrease your expenses, or pull from your bank account. And those are your options in terms of balancing. And what has been going on is that the state has essentially been cleaning out almost all of the cash funds, and that whether it be water or waste tire funds, and we're just dealing with a whole series of bills last year and continuing through this year on taking and essentially zeroing out, or nearly zeroing out, these funds that are important to the water community. They're important to a variety of other communities, so there's another potential network out there. But What the state, we are now approaching $150 million that's been pulled out of the Colorado Water Conservation Board's loan funds for the perpetual base account and from the operational account, as well as another loan fund that they have that comes from federal mineral leasing revenue. So we've had $150 million, and that's money that's been pulled out from those accounts that's not available for water any longer. The budget's balanced, but when we say what do we have to show for it, there's a question out there. And Jennifer Gimble, the executive director of the Water Conservation Board, was even getting worried that she was not going to have enough funds to be able to operate her department next fiscal year. Sal Pace, I have to say, was extremely helpful in getting House Bill 1327, which is the bill that would have just about emasculated the division. Was helpful in getting that slowed down, and we all owe a big thanks to Representative Pace. But there is a continuing need here for staying keenly aware of what's going on with the state's budget, and in large measure to help support programs such as this that are important to water use within this basin. It requires us to be constantly there in D.C. as well, and every year Tom Pitts leads a group, and this year I happen to go with him. The two gentlemen there you see are, the one on the left is John Shields from Wyoming, and the one on the right is Dave Campbell. He runs the San Juan program. We've talked about the Colorado River Recovery Program. It was it was copied on the San Juan River, and they've spent, I believe, around $47 million so far on the San Juan Basin, dealing primarily with two species down there. Dave Campbell is the one that runs that program, and he's in Albuquerque. We're back in D.C. every year. The last 3 years, we've been having a reception for a congressional delegation. And many members in this basin, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, Lower District, and Southeast District, all help support this. And so we do this as an annual thing as we're back, talking to the delegation about the importance of this recovery program. Tom Pitts likes to point out that the 1 year we didn't go back was the year that the funding for the program wasn't in the federal budget. So there's an importance of going back and staying in front of the delegation, not just our own, but also those of other states. And you all know the fellow there in the middle. And the one on the left is Tom Chart, and the right is Dave Campbell. So we're just back there about 3 weeks ago promoting that. Ken actually showed up 20 minutes early for our reception, so it was amazing. These networks that we have, and the need to continue to invest our time and working beyond what maybe has been our traditional areas of focus is extremely important. The Water Congress, is a nonprofit association, and somewhat like water conservancy districts and somewhat like the other electric associations and so forth, we are buffeted by common trends. And those trends, the first of which is that is the network, and that network is more important over time in terms of getting things done. That network is more important than the individual nodes. In other words, the network and the connections that each organization has is far more important than just the work that occurs within that organization. The things like Facebook have totally revolutionized how the next generation is going to be dealing with water, with issues, and including water issues. In 2 year time, from September of 2007 to fall of 2009, Facebook went from 50 million users to 300 million users. The next generation is very involved in communicating this way. And the kind of the neat thing about it is, depending on your point of view, is that the networks that people have are now much more visible. If you go onto somebody's page there, you can bring up a list of who all their friends are, who all their connections are. Then you can click on them and see all who their connections are. And as we move ahead, most associations right now are wrestling with how do we engage our members, how do we look at making those networks and work with those networks, making them more visible. So as we look at those relationships, the relationships are more important than the actual content that we generate out. So that's a major trend. Also, that as the contribution trumps membership. In other words, who is members, and getting those members active and involved and doing things is more important than just the numbers of people that you have in your organization. We'll come back to this in a minute, but one of the things that is essential on making these networks work is to be able to nurture trust as a shared asset, and to enroll folks in a larger picture and to find opportunities for what we call micro-volunteering. And Sieta just went through a long list of folks at this organization, as an example, at this meeting that have micro-volunteered to do a variety of fairly small projects, but significant ones that this doesn't exist without. So those are things that are extremely important. I want to talk to you a little bit about House Bill 1188, which I view as kind of a failure of the networks, or failure to use the networks. House Bill 1188 is the Right to Raft bill. It's introduced by Representative Kathleen Curry and sponsored in the Senate by Mary Hodge. The Water Congress came out initially opposed to this bill primarily for the reason of what's in the front end of the bill, which talks about English common law and the right of navigability. The introduced version of the bill also referenced a case actually was in Oregon as precedent setting for Colorado. But the front end of that bill was saying that all rivers in Colorado we shall consider navigability to the maximum possible extent. And our concern on that was that when you start using the word navigable, there generally, our view is at the federal level, especially with it has to do with water quality regulations, that navigation does not starts bringing in all kinds of federal regulation potential with it. Our other concerns related to the bill are that we want to make sure that the operation of existing water rights is not adversely impacted, that your right to access and maintain and work on diversion structures is not adversely affected, and we don't have a future problem with permitting on water projects. In other words, rafting reaches don't become, in effect, an in-stream flow. And we were concerned about the front-end language in the House bill introduced bill that could have opened the door for that, and things like the public trust doctrine, et cetera. California's had a lot of struggles with that. In the photo there is actually from the Senate Judiciary meeting. The House Judiciary held about 5.5 hours of testimony on the bill, passed out of the House. The Senate went over to the Senate, and the Senate Judiciary held like 7.5 hours of testimony. So we've had nearly 13 hours of testimony. The room, as you see, was packed and fairly emotional. People, very strong feelings on both sides of this issue. The Senate did amend the bill, and the version that came out of the Senate Judiciary was actually acceptable to the Water Congress. They essentially removed the whole front end of that bill that we've just discussed that was of concern to us. It then went to the Senate floor, and the Senate amended the bill. I found out about this the night before, to require the Water Congress to study the issue. Shall study. Water Congress shall study. So we've got the legislature kind of taking over the organization a little bit, and shall recommend solutions, if there are any, for legislative fixes. And that passed out of the Senate. Representative Curry has said that she really doesn't like that version, and so when you have two versions, one coming out of the House and one coming out of the Senate that are different, they have to, in order to resolve that, they must, both houses have to elect to form a conference committee and work on those resolution of those issues. As of right now, it's uncertain what's going to happen with that. There's Senator Whitehead, who replaced Senator Iskar on the Senate side, and is probably one of the leading voices in the Senate on water issues. Has said if it's got this navigability piece in there, he'll do everything he can to stop it. So we've got a conflict yet that isn't resolved. And right now it sits on I've been saying this for the last month, it sits on a razor's edge, and things could go either way. The vote that came out of the Senate was by a one-vote margin, so it's one or two people change their mind, and things could go either way. So partially out of frustration and out of what's been going on, there have been 23 constitutional amendments filed. They were filed a week and a half ago, I believe, which is the last day that initiatives can be filed in order to have time to go through a two-step process, a review and comment hearing process with Legislative Legal Services, and then title setting in front of the title setting board, and then it has to go to collection of signatures. So the rafting interests have floated 4 constitutional amendments, and the call them private property interests have floated 19. Those will, I expect, be pared down to 1 or 2 each before they get through the review and comment, or before get through the title board. So we have a pretty big conflict, and it gets my main issue and my main concern here out of this whole thing is that the result is that it plays out as the rafting interests in conflict with the water holders. And if that happens, it's been a failure of our process, of our networks. It's going to take some energy, should those ballot initiatives go through, and hard work to keep that from happening. But there have been too many decades of hard work here in the Arkansas and throughout the state of Colorado on water rights holders and rafting interests working together, and it's my real hope that this does not play out and set back a lot of these voluntary agreements, set those agreements back decades. As we, again, look from associations, again, what we're looking for is how we simplify participation and engagement of our members. So how are we going to, how are we going to resolve these kinds of conflicts? How can we facilitate people talking with others whose input they need? How do we do that? And as we look ahead, those are going to be key questions, along with how can we challenge our members to facilitate the learning of others about the different things that we do, whether it be rafting, water rights issues, etc. I'm going to talk to you about one other bill. This is House Bill 1159. House Bill 1159 was actually was sponsored by Representative Salpace, and would have required essentially mitigation for the movement of water. If they weren't able to come to agreement with the local conservancy districts on those mitigation agreements, then the 1937 Act, the Water Conservancy Act, would be used as a model for how the court should consider mitigation for movement of water. That bill actually was lost on second reading in the House. So a bill's introduced, it goes to its committee of reference, and then it goes back to the House, full House, to vote on it. It lost on second reading. The Water Congress actually had not taken a position yet on that. We had members all over the board on this one. So we had not yet taken a position. It actually died on Friday. We were due to consider it the following Monday. So it was it played out that way. One of the key statements that was made by those opposing the bill was that we have a process now. We have a network. We have a working relationships, collaborative working relationships going on through something called the Interbasin Compact process that's been going for 4 or 5 years now. Also the Basin Roundtable process. About a week and a half ago, Representative Pace sent a letter to the person, Eric Hecox, who is running the basin, the overall IBCC in the process, and says, I am unaware of specific proposals from the IBCC regarding proposed statutory changes to ensure mitigation of impacts resulting from the movement of water. After the debate on House Bill 1159, it is safe to now say that most legislators believe this work is being conducted by the IBCC. And he goes on further to state, essentially imply that next year will be, what he would like to do is see some kind of work product come out of the IBCC before the next legislative session. In a lot of ways, this issue has arisen initially here in the Arkansas Valley, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But there is an opportunity through Basin Roundtable dialogue to say how you feel about that. How do you feel about the current state of the law? How do you feel about next steps? So I think that, and it may be something that the Basin Roundtables may want to consider. Representative Pace may put it in front of them regardless. So as I reflect back on associations and what we can do together, working cooperatively, we need to continue to nurture and work on these networks to be able to visualize the networks that are out there and continue to work with them effectively. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Doug.
There's a switch.
There we go. Thank you, Doug. And we have some time for some questions. If I can get the mic out. There we go. While he gets that together. We have some time for some questions. Do we have some questions from the audience? This is a wonderful opportunity. Steve.
Doug, what do you see the tie-in between the RICDs, recreation and channel diversions, and the issue between landowners and rafters, if you will? Do you see a tie-in there?
In this particular case, I don't see it quite as direct. Certainly, a lot of folks have worked on coming up with the flow management agreements or RICDs and RICDs. The particular issue that got this whole thing started was on the Taylor River. where we had a landowner from Texas came over and purchased some land on the Taylor and was threatening at least to cut off that rafting through there. So it wasn't so much on that particular issue, wasn't so much a flow issue as it was a property rights and access issue. And that is what initially drove Representative Curry to introduce the bill, and it was, I think the intent was initially to craft it primarily as a property rights issue of when can you, we've got some uncertainty in our law about whether or not the right to float, those that are sponsoring the legislation believe the right to float existed everywhere. From the moment that the state was created, that we adopted English common law, and that meant that therefore everyone, the right to float, as long as you were passing through without touching anything, existed everywhere. And there are those that believe that the right to float existed nowhere. And to some extent, that's really, and it gets into an issue that really isn't so much our issue. It's a property rights issue of can you touch the bed and the banks. But in terms of really linking it to the flow management agreements and so forth, my major concern in this, as I said, is that this battle, should it shape up that way, gets crafted as for those that have worked on those agreements versus those that are representing the rafting industry. And if that happens, then we have some real potential for some negative impacts on a lot of those agreements.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Is there another question in the House? We're way back there.
In regards to the private property issues on 1188, is it still in the bill as far as portaging out to possibly eliminate a potential hazard? And what protection does the private property right or the private property owner along that riverbank have, or what protection do they have if somebody gets injured when they're portaging the river or a potential hazard?
It's difficult to, part of the problem in answering that question is that there have been so many different versions of the bill. What was in the House bill did allow for portaging. What was in the Senate bill did not. And what came out of actually Senate Judiciary removed that, Senator Hodge and her amendment removed that whole portaging question from there. So that the portaging issue remains out of the version that came out of Senate Judiciary. So should they go back to that version, it would not be there. The House version did allow for portaging around obstacles. From what I understand from the rafting industry is that they really don't feel that portaging is a big issue for them. That there are relatively few instances in Colorado where they're commercially rafting rivers where they have to portage around portage. And so they were actually willing to give that piece up in the Senate Judiciary. So again, it just remains uncertain right now what's going to come out, what version, or whether or not they're going to go beyond the scope of differences and try to craft something else. So what we'll see is kind of unknown right now. So.
Okay, one more quick one.
Wasn't that expanded from commercial rafters to everybody now? So that makes it open to tubers and everything else, if I'm not correct.
The version that came out of the House did not have that, but the version that came out of the Senate Judiciary did exactly that. So you're correct, if they go back to that version.